The Indiana Fever may have just uncovered a truth that changes everything about their season, and the most surprising part is that the answer may have been sitting right in front of them the entire time. For weeks, fans watched a roster that entered the year with championship expectations struggle to find consistency. This was not supposed to be a rebuilding team learning how to win. This was not supposed to be a group hoping to sneak into the playoffs. The Fever spent the off-season building around the idea that they were ready to compete with the best teams in the league. They had one of the biggest stars in basketball, a talented supporting cast, a coach with a strong reputation, and a fan base that believed the franchise was finally ready to take the next step. Yet, despite all of those advantages, something felt off almost immediately. The offense often looked slower than expected. Possessions sometimes ended without putting meaningful pressure on the defense. Leads disappeared. Games that should have felt comfortable became stressful. And as the season progressed, one question kept growing louder. Why did a team built around Caitlin Clark not always look like a team built around Caitlin Clark? The answer to that question has become the center of one of the most important debates surrounding the Fever, because recent results are beginning to suggest that Indiana's ceiling may be directly connected to how much the offense embraces Clark's style of play. What looked like a simple strategic discussion a few weeks ago is now becoming a conversation about the identity of the entire franchise, and the implications could stretch far beyond a single winning streak. The frustration surrounding Indiana's start was not simply about wins and losses. Teams can survive a slow start. Championship contenders often experience growing pains early in a season. The real concern was the pattern that seemed to appear over and over again. The Fever entered several games with advantages on paper, only to find themselves struggling against opponents they were expected to beat. Analysts, fans, and former players all began pointing toward the same issues. The offense frequently looked disconnected from the strengths of its most important player. Caitlin Clark's greatest gift is never limited to scoring. Her ability to manipulate defenses, create opportunities before they appear, and force opponents into impossible decisions is what makes her different. Defenders cannot simply focus on stopping her shot because she can punish them as a passer. They cannot overcommit to stopping her playmaking because she can score from virtually anywhere on the floor. When a player possesses that level of offensive gravity, most teams build everything around maximizing it. Yet there were stretches during the Fever's first 10 games where Clark felt less like the center of the offense and more like one piece within a broader system. The ball moved around the perimeter, possessions slowed down, and opportunities to attack defenses before they were set often disappeared. The result was an offense that occasionally looked ordinary, despite having one of the most extraordinary offensive talents in basketball. As losses began to pile up, fans started asking whether the Fever were trying too hard to fit Clark into a predetermined structure, rather than allowing the structure to evolve around her unique abilities. That debate naturally led to discussions about Stephanie White and the offensive philosophy she brought into the season. It is important to recognize that criticism of a system is not necessarily criticism of a coach. Basketball history is filled with examples of successful coaches whose preferred styles worked brilliantly in one environment and struggled in another. Systems depend on personnel. What succeeds with one roster may not succeed with another. What some observers began questioning was whether Indiana's offensive approach truly reflected the strengths of the players available. The motion offense, with its emphasis on ball movement, shared creation responsibilities, and structured decision-making, has produced results in many situations. But the Fever are not a typical team. They possess a player whose greatest strength is controlling the flow of an entire game. Caitlin is at her best when she is reading defenses, dictating pace, and forcing opponents to react to her decisions. Every possession that minimizes those opportunities potentially reduces the pressure placed on opposing defenses. Throughout the opening stretch of the season, that concern continued growing because the competitive results were not providing evidence that the existing approach was working. Indiana sat at 5 wins and 5 losses, a record that might be acceptable for a rebuilding team, but felt disappointing for a roster with championship aspirations. More importantly, several losses exposed the same recurring weaknesses. The offense became stagnant during critical moments, defensive breakdowns compounded offensive inconsistency, momentum disappeared far too easily. Each game seemed to reinforce the belief that the Fever had not yet discovered the version of themselves capable of reaching their highest potential. Then something began to change. It did not happen overnight, and it was not immediately obvious to casual observers. The Washington game may ultimately be remembered as the moment the shift became visible. The box score alone could not fully explain it. What stood out was the way the game felt. Clark had the ball in her hands more often. The offense appeared more aggressive. Possessions developed with greater purpose. Defenses were forced to make quicker decisions. Indiana looked faster, more confident, and far more difficult to predict. The victory itself mattered, but the process behind it may have been even more important. For the first time in weeks, there were signs that the Fever were leaning more heavily into what made them unique. The offense was not perfect, but it looked closer to the vision many fans had imagined before the season began. It was as though Indiana had finally started acknowledging that its greatest competitive advantage was not something that needed to be balanced with other priorities. It was something that needed to be emphasized. The Washington game alone was not enough to settle the debate, but it planted a seed. It created the possibility that a different version of the Fever might be emerging, and what happened next would only make that possibility harder to ignore. The game against Chicago transformed a growing conversation into a full-scale discussion about the future of the team. Everything seemed to revolve around the connection between Caitlin Clark and Aliyah Boston. For months, observers had argued that the Clark-Boston partnership represented the most dangerous offensive weapon available to Indiana. Against the Sky, that argument suddenly looked impossible to dispute. The pick and roll became the centerpiece of the offense, and Chicago struggled to find answers. Every defensive adjustment created a new problem. If defenders stepped up to contain Clark, Boston found space. If they stayed attached to Boston, Clark attacked. If help defenders rotated, shooters became available around the perimeter. The action placed constant stress on the defense and forced Chicago into a series of impossible choices. What made the performance so significant was not simply the production, it was the efficiency and flow with which everything happened. Indiana did not look like a team searching for answers. They looked like a team imposing its will. The historic performances from Clark and Boston grabbed headlines, but the larger story was how naturally the offense functioned when built around their partnership. The game felt less complicated. Decisions happened faster. Opportunities appeared more frequently. For a fan base that had spent weeks wondering what the Fever could become, Chicago offered a glimpse of the answer. It looked like the beginning of something much bigger than a single win. By the time Indiana followed that performance with another victory, the discussion surrounding the team had changed completely. Suddenly, people were no longer focused exclusively on the problems that had defined the first 10 games. Instead, attention shifted toward what the Fever might be capable of if this new approach continued. The numbers began supporting what fans believed they were seeing on the court. The offense looked more explosive, teammates appeared more comfortable, the pace increased. Most importantly, winning followed. This is where the conversation surrounding Stephanie White becomes especially interesting, because coaches often face a difficult challenge when reality begins conflicting with original plans. Every coach enters a season with ideas about how a team should play. The best coaches, however, are willing to adapt when evidence points in a different direction. The recent stretch of games has created a fascinating test for Indiana because the results appear to be rewarding a style that places Clark at the center of everything. The question now is whether that shift represents a permanent philosophical adjustment or a temporary response to immediate circumstances. Fans have noticed the difference, analysts have noticed the difference, opposing defenses have certainly noticed the difference. The challenge moving forward will be maintaining the commitment necessary to fully embrace what has been working. What makes this situation even more compelling is the broader context surrounding Caitlin Clark's development. Throughout her basketball career, success has followed when offenses have trusted her instincts and allowed her to dictate the game. This is not because she needs complete control of every possession. It is because her ability to process information in real time creates opportunities that few players can consistently generate. Great players force defenses to react. Elite players force entire organizations to rethink how basketball should be played around them. Clark increasingly appears to belong in that second category. The recent winning streak has amplified discussions about her value, her impact, and her place within the MVP race. Statistics already place her among the league's most productive players. Team success is often the final ingredient required for serious MVP consideration, and that is why these recent games matter so much. If Indiana continues winning while embracing a Clark-centered offensive identity, the conversation could shift dramatically. Instead of discussing whether Clark is having an MVP-caliber season, people may begin discussing whether anyone else has a stronger case. That possibility would have seemed far less realistic during the frustration of the first 10 games, but recent performances have changed the trajectory of the discussion. Now, the spotlight turns toward what comes next. Winning streaks create excitement, but they also create expectations. The upcoming portion of Indiana's schedule presents an opportunity to prove that the recent surge is more than a temporary hot streak. If the Fever continue building around the Clark-Boston partnership and maintain the offensive principles that fueled these victories, they have a chance to transform the narrative surrounding their entire season. A team that looked stuck at .500 could suddenly emerge as one of the league's most dangerous contenders. A coaching staff facing questions could receive validation for making adjustments, and a franchise searching for its identity could finally discover exactly what it wants to be. The most fascinating part is that none of these possibilities require dramatic roster changes or major organizational overhauls. The talent has already been there. The pieces have already been in place. The only question is whether Indiana will continue trusting the formula that has produced its best basketball. Because if recent evidence is telling the truth, the Fever may have finally found the blueprint that unlocks everything they hoped this season could become. If there is one moment that may ultimately define this entire season, it might not be a game-winning shot, a record-breaking performance, or even a playoff victory. It might be the realization that Indiana's best basketball looks remarkably different from the version of basketball that opened the season. That realization has become impossible to ignore because the contrast is becoming clearer with every game. During the early portion of the season, Indiana often looked like a team trying to prove it could win in multiple ways. On paper, that sounds like a strength. Championship teams need versatility. They need counters and adjustments. They need multiple paths to victory. But there is a difference between being versatile and moving away from your greatest advantage. The Fever sometimes appeared to be searching for balance when what they actually needed was clarity. Every elite team eventually discovers an identity. The best organizations stop trying to be everything and instead become exceptional at the thing they do best. For Indiana, that identity is beginning to reveal itself through the Clark-Boston partnership. Defenses know it is coming, yet they continue struggling to stop it. Coaches prepare for it, yet it still creates favorable situations. Opponents spend entire game plans attempting to limit it, yet it continues producing efficient offense. That is the mark of a truly elite action. It works not because it surprises people, but because it places defenders in situations where every available choice carries consequences. The brilliance of the Clark-Boston combination goes beyond traditional pick-and-roll basketball. What makes it so difficult to defend is the number of decisions it forces within seconds. Most offensive actions create one problem for a defense. This one creates several at the same time. When Boston sets a screen, defenders immediately face a dilemma. Fight over the screen and Clark can create separation. Switch defenders and Clark often attacks the mismatch. Bring help and passing lanes open throughout the floor. Stay attached to shooters and Boston gains space near the basket. Every defensive adjustment creates another opportunity somewhere else. That is why so many observers believe Indiana's offense reaches a completely different level when this action becomes the foundation rather than an occasional option. The Fever suddenly become harder to predict because defenses are forced into constant reaction mode. Instead of dictating terms, opponents spend entire possessions trying to recover from one challenge after another. The most dangerous offenses in basketball are built around exactly this principle. They create pressure that compounds over time. One mistake leads to another. One rotation creates another opening. Eventually, the defense breaks. During Indiana's recent winning stretch, that process has been visible possession after possession, and it has fundamentally changed the way the team looks on the court. What makes this development particularly interesting is how closely it mirrors what happened during Clark's rookie season. There was a period when Indiana was still trying to figure out exactly who it wanted to be. The offense often felt caught between competing ideas. Coaches experimented with different approaches, rotations changed, responsibilities shifted. Through all of that uncertainty, one lesson kept emerging. The more the team trusted Clark to orchestrate the offense, the better the results became. It was not an immediate transformation, it happened gradually. But by the second half of the season, the Fever looked dramatically different than they had during the opening weeks. The pace increased, offensive efficiency improved, confidence grew. Players began understanding exactly where they fit within the system. Most importantly, winning became more consistent. That historical context is important because it raises an obvious question. Are we witnessing the same evolution all over again? Is Indiana once again discovering that its highest ceiling exists when the offense revolves around the unique skills of its franchise player? The recent evidence certainly points in that direction. While it would be premature to draw definitive conclusions from a handful of games, the pattern looks familiar. The results look familiar. Even the conversations surrounding the team feel familiar. Fans are once again watching a roster become more dangerous as it embraces the strengths of its most important player. That reality has created a fascinating challenge for Stephanie White. Coaching at the professional level is often portrayed as a battle between competing philosophies, but the best coaches understand that adaptation is just as important as conviction. Every coach has preferred systems and principles. Those ideas help define careers. They create identities. They provide structure. But successful coaches also recognize when circumstances demand flexibility. What works for one roster may not work for another. The ability to adjust without abandoning core beliefs is one of the most valuable skills any coach can possess. For White, the recent success places her in a position where every decision will be scrutinized. If Indiana continues leaning into a Clark-centered offense and keeps winning, the pressure to maintain that approach will only increase. If the team drifts back towards some of the tendencies that defined the first 10 games, every offensive struggle will reignite the debate. Fair or not, that is the reality of coaching a team with championship aspirations. Results shape narratives, winning creates trust, losing creates questions. Right now, the Fever are experiencing the type of success that makes fans believe they have finally discovered the formula capable of unlocking the roster's full potential. The conversation became even more interesting when comments from players began to align with what many observers had been saying for weeks. Sophie Cunningham's remarks generated significant attention because they appeared to validate concerns that had already been circulating among fans and analysts. Whether intentional or not, those comments added another layer to an ongoing discussion about team identity. Players experience systems differently than coaches. They feel the flow of games from inside the action. They understand which possessions create confidence and which possessions create uncertainty. When comments from within the locker room appear to support observations being made outside the organization, people pay attention. That does not mean there is conflict. It does not mean there is disagreement behind the scenes. What it does mean is that conversations surrounding the Fever's offensive approach are no longer limited to social media debates or television segments. They have become part of the broader story surrounding the franchise. Every victory strengthens one side of the argument. Every loss strengthens the other. And because the recent winning streak has coincided with a more Clark-centered style, supporters of that approach feel increasingly validated. Perhaps the most significant consequence of Indiana's recent surge is what it means for Caitlin Clark's place within the MVP race. For much of the season, Clark's individual production has been difficult to dispute. Her scoring numbers, playmaking impact, and overall influence on opposing defenses have consistently placed her among the league's most productive players. The challenge was that MVP discussions rarely focus exclusively on statistics. Team success matters. Narrative matters. Voters want to see evidence that a player's impact translates directly into winning. That is where the recent stretch becomes incredibly important. If Indiana continues climbing the standings while operating through Clark's strengths, her MVP case becomes substantially stronger. The conversation shifts from individual brilliance to transformational impact. Suddenly, the story is not just about impressive numbers, it becomes about a player whose presence changed the direction of an entire season. Those are the types of narratives that often define award races. They create momentum, they attract attention, they make it easier for people to understand a player's value beyond traditional statistics. Clark has already proven she can produce at an elite level. The next step is proving that her style of basketball can elevate Indiana into genuine contention, and recent results suggest that possibility is becoming increasingly realistic. The most exciting aspect of all this may be the timing. Indiana's upcoming schedule provides a genuine opportunity to build on recent momentum. Momentum in professional sports can be fragile. Teams often struggle to sustain breakthroughs because stronger opponents quickly expose lingering weaknesses. But the Fever are entering a stretch that offers the chance to reinforce everything they have learned during this winning streak. Each victory would strengthen confidence. Each successful performance would provide additional evidence that the current direction is working. Most importantly, each game would help expand the sample size. Critics can dismiss 3 games as coincidence. They can explain away short-term success. It becomes much harder to dismiss 7 wins, 8 wins, or a sustained period of high-level basketball. That is why the next few weeks could prove so important. They represent an opportunity not only to improve the standings, but also to answer lingering questions about the team's identity. Is this truly who the Fever are now? Have they finally embraced the style that maximizes their roster? Or is this simply a temporary adjustment that could disappear when adversity returns? The answers will emerge over time, but the opportunity is clearly there. For now, one thing is becoming increasingly difficult to argue against. Indiana looks more dangerous when Caitlin Clark is empowered to be exactly who she is. The offense flows more naturally, the pace increases, teammates benefit from cleaner opportunities, defenses appear more vulnerable. Everything seems connected in a way that was often missing during the first part of the season. That does not mean every problem has been solved. Championship teams are built through constant improvement. There will still be difficult games, frustrating losses, and moments that test the organization's commitment to its current direction. But for the first time all season, the Fever appear to have discovered something that resembles a clear path forward. And if that path continues producing results, the rest of the league may soon be forced to confront a difficult reality. The version of Indiana that everyone expected before opening night may finally be arriving, and it could be arriving at exactly the right time. What makes the current moment so important is that it extends beyond a simple winning streak. Teams go on hot streaks every season. Players catch fire, opponents miss shots. A few fortunate bounces can temporarily change the mood around an organization. But what is happening in Indiana feels different because the improvement appears connected to a specific basketball philosophy rather than random variation. When analysts study successful teams, they often search for repeatable advantages. Can the success be replicated? Can it survive against stronger opponents? Can it hold up over a larger sample size? Those questions matter because sustainable success is built on principles, not luck. The Fever are beginning to look like a team that has found a repeatable formula. The offense is creating higher quality opportunities, the pace is forcing opponents into uncomfortable situations, defenses are spending more time reacting than dictating. Most importantly, the team's most talented player is being placed in situations where her unique abilities can influence every possession. That combination creates a foundation that feels far more sustainable than simply hoping shots continue to fall. It's the difference between winning because everything went right and winning because the underlying process gives you a legitimate advantage.
For opposing coaches, that reality creates a growing problem. The more Indiana leans into this identity, the more difficult game planning becomes. Stopping great players is already challenging. Stopping great players within systems specifically designed around their strengths is even harder. Defenses can prepare for Clark's shooting range. They can study her passing tendencies. They can analyze film for hours searching for weaknesses. Yet the challenge remains the same. Every adjustment designed to slow her down opens opportunities elsewhere. That is what separates elite offensive engines from ordinary stars. They create pressure even when they are not scoring. Every defender on the floor becomes aware of their presence. Every rotation must account for their decision-making. Every possession begins with the question of how to contain them. Clark has increasingly become that type of player. Her influence stretches beyond traditional statistics because she changes the geometry of the game itself. Defenses are forced to extend farther from the basket. Passing lanes become more dangerous. Help defenders hesitate. One hesitation becomes an opening. One opening becomes a basket. Over the course of an entire game, those moments add up. Over the course of an entire season, they can transform a franchise. That is why the next phase of Indiana's season may be less about proving that Clark-centered basketball works and more about determining how fully the organization is willing to commit to it. The evidence supporting the approach continues to grow. The victories are becoming harder to dismiss. The offensive efficiency is becoming more noticeable. Even the overall energy surrounding the team feels different. Players appear more confident, possessions appear more purposeful. There is a level of clarity that often emerges when teams finally understand exactly who they are. For weeks, Indiana looked like a group searching for answers. Now they look like a group discovering them. That distinction matters because confidence in professional sports is often tied directly to identity. Players perform faster when they know where opportunities will come from. Decision-making improves when responsibilities are clearly defined. Trust grows when teammates understand how each piece fits together. The recent stretch has provided glimpses of that type of cohesion, and if it continues developing, Indiana could become significantly more dangerous than its record currently suggests. There is also a broader significance to what is happening because it speaks to one of the most fascinating challenges in sports. Every generation produces athletes who are so unique that organizations must evolve around them. Traditional systems suddenly become less important than maximizing extraordinary talent. Coaches, executives, and teammates are forced to ask difficult questions. Should the player adapt to the system, or should the system adapt to the player? There is no universal answer. Every situation is different. But history often favors the teams willing to embrace greatness when it appears. The greatest dynasties in sports rarely succeeded by forcing transcendent players into conventional structures. They succeeded by recognizing what made those players special and building around it. The conversation surrounding Indiana increasingly feels like a version of that debate. Clark's skill set is not typical. Her vision is not typical. Her range is not typical. Her ability to manipulate defenses is not typical. When a player possesses abilities that exist outside normal expectations, organizations eventually face a choice.
Do they continue operating according to traditional ideas, or do they build around what makes that player unique? The Fever appeared to be moving toward an answer, and recent results suggest that answer may unlock a completely different level of basketball. As the season progresses, the pressure surrounding every decision will only increase. If Indiana continues winning, expectations will rise, national attention will grow, every performance will be examined through the lens of championship potential. That is both the opportunity and the challenge. Success changes the standard. A team that began the year hoping to contend is now entering a phase where anything less than contention may feel disappointing. That shift creates pressure on everyone involved. It places pressure on the coaching staff to maintain what is working. It places pressure on players to sustain their level of execution, and it places pressure on the organization to fully commit to the direction that has produced its best basketball. The encouraging part for Fever fans is that those are the types of pressures successful teams want. They are far preferable to the uncertainty that dominated the opening weeks of the season. Questions about potential are being replaced by questions about how high the ceiling truly is. That represents meaningful progress. For Caitlin Clark personally, the timing could not be more significant. Great players are often remembered for the moments when team success finally catches up with individual brilliance. Clark has already established herself as one of the most impactful players in the sport. She has already delivered highlights, records, and performances that captured national attention. What remains is the pursuit of the accomplishments that define careers: MVP awards, deep playoff runs, championship contention. Those goals require organizational alignment. They require teammates performing at a high level. They require systems that maximize strengths rather than minimize them. The recent stretch suggests Indiana may finally be moving toward that alignment. If that continues, Clark's individual success could become part of a much larger story about the rise of a franchise that finally figured out how to unleash its greatest asset. And that brings us back to the question that started this entire discussion. What if the answer was sitting in front of Indiana all along? What if the solution to the inconsistency, the frustration, and the underwhelming start was not a trade, a roster change, or a dramatic organizational shakeup? What if it was simply a matter of fully embracing the player around whom the entire franchise was built? The recent evidence points strongly in that direction. The offense looks better, the results look better, the future looks brighter. Of course, basketball seasons are not decided in June. Challenges remain, stronger opponents await, adversity always returns eventually. But for the first time this season, the Fever appeared to have a clear identity and a believable path forward. The debate that dominated the opening weeks may finally be approaching its conclusion. Now comes the real test. Can Indiana stay committed to what is working when expectations rise? Can the coaching staff resist the temptation to drift away from the formula that has produced results? Can the Fever continue building around the Clark-Boston partnership as defenses devote increasing resources to stopping it? Those questions will determine how this season is remembered, because if the recent stretch is a preview of Indiana's future, then the rest of the league may soon have a serious problem on its hands. The Fever are no longer searching for their identity. They may have found it. And if they truly have, this winning streak could eventually be remembered as the moment everything changed.